Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Renewables Podcast. Thanks very much for coming back and watching another fun-filled episode, hopefully. If you haven't already subscribed, I'm going to get you early on this one. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel or on YouTube or on Spotify, then head over there, and we'd really appreciate you clicking the little like button or the little follow button and just keeping up to date with what we've got going on. We've got some really interesting guests today including, and we'd love you to stay on track with all the episodes that we put out. But before we get over to our exciting guest today, how are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing good, thanks, Sam. It's busy out in the world of solar, but we're coming down that hill, aren't we, in the summer season now towards the autumn, darker months. So things may be quieting off a little bit.
Yeah, it's exactly like that with us as well. It's kind of looking at planning the Christmas party and things, and you think, oh my gosh, can't believe we're at that point. It's only just summer. But yeah, it's rolling down to the end of the year. But without further ado, this episode is going to be all about the world of smoke alarms and fire protection and all that sort of stuff with the release of the PAS 63100 document, which I'm already sick of saying. I've said that so many times over the last year, but we both think is really important. So we've got Gareth here from AICO, and we're going to have a little in-depth chat about the standards around smoke alarms, what we should be doing, what we're maybe not doing, and also how we can comply the best with some of the best equipment out there, which I'm loving fitting the AICO stuff. But welcome to the podcast, Gareth. How are you doing? How was the journey over?
Oh, very good. No, thank you very much for having me. Nice to meet you guys again. Yeah, it's been a busy year this year. It's been very hectic. Yeah. New laws, legislation, stuff like that coming in, so it's been pretty crazy. But yeah, we keep.
Well, going. You guys must get involved with all sorts of different things, like the social housing, and there's obviously big changes or big pressure on landlords for even just the private rented sector. And then to throw a big spanner in the works, we've got this whole PAS 63100. So you must be just continually learning what's next and what's coming out next.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, it's literally no day's the same. You know, every day you kind of, 1 minute you're speaking with, a contractor who's who's trying to do an install. The next minute you're, on with the social landlord, kind of, helping them go through data. The next minute you're speaking with wholesalers regarding supply and demand of product. It's pretty full on at the minute, but it's interesting. Keeps us busy.
Yeah. What's your background then, just to give us a bit of a feel for you as did you come from a corporate background or a trades background, or where did you kind of start?
Very much a trades background. Started a lot of years ago, 25 or so years ago in the electrical industry, essentially working in and around the kind of Yorkshire, Lincolnshire area as an electrician. After that, I thought it'd be a fantastic idea to start my own business up, and then realised how much hard work it is, and I don't envy you guys at all because it's really tough. And then after a period of time, I decided that I was going to work in social housing. Okay. So essentially, I went in social housing as kind of like an electrical manager. Looked after a team of electricians that looked after about 24,000 properties, and that's kind of where my big connection with AICO kind of came from, essentially. And then I've been with AICO for about 3 years now, so it's been a bit of a journey. But
I can imagine in social housing they're a bit more up on the smoke detection element than lots of owner-occupied properties where it's very much still, we'll stick a battery smoke alarm on the landing and tick that box for a smoke alarm. It's amazing, I think, Sam, the homes we go in and the disregard people have for stuff like that. It's absolutely mad.
It is crazy, and ever since I think what really refocused me on all of this was this PAS 63100 document. There I go. I've said it twice now. There's going to be plenty more of the PAS 63100 document references, but that really focused me back on the whole smoke alarm side of things, because you get used to it when you're doing your electrical apprenticeship, if it's an electrical apprenticeship you've done, of putting in smoke alarms and where you put them and all of that. But then what I found when we specialise as a company into the renewables world, we kind of stepped to one side of all of that sort of run-of-the-mill stuff that we tended to do day in, day out as a kind of a general electrician working in, lots of different scenarios, into just being quite siloed into just looking at the solar and the battery element of it. But then when this PAS document came out, and we were, quote unquote, forced to look back at it, I was looking at it, and when I was doing the surveys, I remember the very first survey I did, and I looked and I was like, that is probably the oldest smoke alarm I've ever seen. It was like, I've been to the AICO training, and which we'll talk about a little bit later on, but some of I think it was one of the ones that was almost like the first on your timeline wall that you have at AICO, where it shows the development of smoke alarms. It was the oldest thing on it and that they had. And so I asked them, and so I kind of started to talk to them about this new kind of industry guidance of the PAS 6300 document, and said, we now need to look at your smoke alarms. And the response was, oh yeah, we've got smoke alarms. And I went up, and the one downstairs was this crusty old smoke alarm, and the one upstairs had the lid hanging down and the battery out. And I went, oh, the one upstairs, that doesn't work then. Oh yeah, it does work, but my husband took the battery out a year or so ago because it kept going off when we were cooking. And I was like, so you haven't got smoke alarms then? I was like, oh yeah, it just needs a new battery in it. I'm thinking, this is a problem. And then ever since that survey, when I've been going round some properties, the lack of proper smoke, CO detection in properties is staggering. There's obviously the ones that do have it, but it's staggering how many places don't have it, or they have it and they think they're protected, but the alarms are, 5 years out of date. And it's really scary. But you must see it as well, Mark, as well as me. It can't just be me that sees this.
No, it's too common, and often the wrong alarm in the wrong location as well. That's something else where they've popped a smoke alarm up in the garage and not got a heat detector when the car's going in there, and or there's not even one in a kitchen area where there's cooking appliances and things like that. And there is a massive problem, I think. Maybe not so much in rental, because there is some more rigid legislation around all that now. And I know we're different in Scotland, Wales and England. I get really confused with what's allowed and where. But there is that there to a degree. But in owner-occupied, you are very much left to your own devices. Unless it's maybe new build, where there was building regs rules in place, and there would have to be a certain element of smoke detection. There's a lot of properties in this country way prior to that. Yeah. And it is lacking massively, I think. And the PAS, whatever the numbers are, I'm not going to say them again. The PAS is kind of driving something to be done about that. I don't actually think batteries are that much of a fire risk of themselves in that iteration. E-scooters and stuff is a different ballgame. But it is making people have that work done as we go through this upgrade cycle. All these homes are going to get PV, they're going to get batteries. It might take 20 years, but eventually they will. And on that journey, if we can implement a regime of detecting fires, because they are quite common still out there in homes around the country. Fires are happening every day. It might save some lives, don't stop damage to property quite so much. I think that's a massive upside to some of the changes we've had in regs. We'll complain about them, but what's not to like about that? It's a low-cost item, relatively speaking, and the safety benefit is huge. But one of the things that I'd learned from all of that was understanding what this is, L2, grade 2, whatever the technical term, what that was. Because originally I just thought, oh, well, battery system will stick a heat detector above where the battery lives and that's it, tick, done. But when you actually look at it, it isn't that at all, is it?
No, it's a complex beast. Yeah. And there's no kind of one size fits all. That's the kind of, the kind of crux of it, to be fair. I mean, exactly as you say, I've been into properties and you go up there and you see that alarm and it's yellow and it's furry, you don't know whether to pet it or take it down, it's kind of one of those. So yeah, essentially, changing from that kind of system to, to getting residents to understand the risks, around being in the home. Most people think that you're safe in the home, but there's more deaths from fires in the home than there is anywhere else. So it's kind of somewhere where we almost let our guards down a little bit and we become very complacent. And then, unfortunately, that tends to, lead us down the wrong kind of, path, shall we say. And exactly as you say, the array of different alarms, different types of system, there is not a one size fits all, because every property is different. Every property is laid out differently. Every resident is different. Their kind of needs need taken into account. Every alarm has its own kind of unique abilities, so, for where you'd site them and things like that. So it really does kind of open up kind of like a myriad of opportunities and, kind of doorways for you to look through when you're designing a system.
Yeah, I think I want to get onto a little bit of not any sort of in-depth design. I want to touch on what sort of system we need to be looking at to comply with PAS and the correct grade and what that kind of means, just to kind of demystify some of that a little bit. But before we go on to that, I wanted to look at start right at the beginning of if it's a like a homeowner watching or listening to this podcast, or if it's a electrical contractor that might actually be missing out on a little bit of work and covering their backs for making sure they are complying correctly with what's required when they're doing major works or even minor works within properties. So in terms of like when should a customer or a contractor be looking at assessing the smoke alarm system within a property? Is there kind of like a threshold for when if you're changing a socket in someone's house or adding a socket? I dare say there's probably not a requirement to change all the smoke alarms, but if we're putting a kitchen in or there's like a side extension, or is there kind of like a threshold that a contractor needs to be aware of as to when they do have to really seriously take into account what the smoke alarm system is within that property?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that actually kind of defines, as soon as you do that piece of work, you've suddenly got to kind of, apart from, like a full renovation or something like that. Every kind of property is different. So essentially what I always say to electricians when I'm doing the training is, you're probably the only person who is going to advise that resident on fire safety and fire alarms and smoke detectors. If you don't advise that resident at that time, nobody else will. So, potentially your gas engineers won't, if they get a decorator in or someone like that, they're certainly not going to comment on it. So it really is, there's no probably good or bad time to kind of suggest the fact that, if your fire detection system is not compliant or it's not up to date with the latest standards. So regardless of whether they are literally just going in to change a socket, if they notice that there is only that one alarm which is hanging down on the ceiling, there's no battery in it, doesn't hurt to advise. At the end of the day, it's the resident's decision as to whether they take up the work. But I do feel as electricians we've probably got the responsibility to make people aware. Obviously when you start looking at other things like upgrades, I mean, you mentioned kitchen upgrade for argument's sake. If you're spending 5, 10, 15, 20, sky's the limit on a kitchen, when the amount you can spend on it, put in a heat detector in that area to protect not only your investment but also to protect your life seems like kind of small change essentially at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean the words within the main document for fire safety within the home is BS 58396, and they use a word which is materially altered. And essentially, realistically, when you're looking at materially altered, you're possibly looking at a rewire, maybe a change of the way that property is being powered, maybe a change of use, maybe an extension, that kind of thing. So any time a property is materially altered is probably the best time to start looking at this system maybe needs amending. We maybe need to have a look at this in a bit more depth and change it to make it more suitable for how it's now going to be used.
We're going to interrupt today's show to talk about a new product from Proteus, the sponsors of our lovely little home here on the Renewables Podcast. And this is a Type B RCBO in single module format. And this is a super exciting development, I think, in the world of switchgear for us as installers. This is 10 kA rated and bi-directional with all the right markings and logos on. I'm going to pass this over to my co-host Sam for him to have a look at. See what you make of that, mate.
Yeah, it's... I actually dug out in the unit where it's just next door to where we sat now, an older Proteus RCBO. This is a Type A, and it's a 6 kA one. And the difference in the size is next to nothing. So this is the older one here, and this is the new one. So it's basically the same size, but this is a Type B. And we know there's a lot more that goes into a Type B RCBO than does a Type AC. So it just shows the progression there that Proteus are on and trying to save us space in these DBs by literally having next to no height difference on the two products.
I know, I mean, the Type B normally would be a couple of modules wide at least, probably more, and they've got it all into one single space is incredible. And I know from speaking with a contractor over on DMs who'd had his MCS assessment recently was saying that the assessor had said he should have a Type B RCBO feeding into his battery storage system, which is outdoors, which is interesting. So I think we're going to see the growth in application of these things. And it's just nice to see the range of stuff Proteus have got out there for us as installers. And there'll be a link in the description alongside wherever you're watching or listening to this to go off and check that out. Let's jump back to the chat. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And one of the people or parties who could affect this is maybe energy retailers. And we've said this before about EICRs, Sam, that if you're going to go onto an off-peak tariff where you might be using more electrical equipment overnight while you're sleeping, it doesn't hurt to ensure that the electrical system is safe before they allow that. And the same could be true for a smoke alarm system. So it's okay, you've applied for your EV tariff overnight. We're happy to do that, but we want to see certificates to say you've got smoke alarms in your home. They do it with MCS certificates for an export MPAN. So they could very much do it for that as well. And that's kind of putting a base level of safety in a property for when people start with using the tumble dryer at 2 o'clock in the morning, the washing machine and all this other stuff just to try and save energy. Lots of consumers looking to do that and rinse every pound and pence they can. Can't hand up here for myself for doing the same.
Yeah.
So I think there's an element there, maybe Octopus and Eon and such, where they could ask those questions. Whether they could enforce it or not is a separate issue, but they could certainly make the consumer aware that you might want to consider that at least. And as far as I'm aware, right now they don't do that. And through EICRs as well, we sometimes will exclude the smoke detection scheme in a building, especially if it's a fire alarm like you've got in here. That would generally be done through separate inspection, but on a residential home, we would still cover that in our EICR, and maybe we can't code it as electrically unsafe. We can certainly comment to say your smoke alarms look there about as old as your 25-year-old son hanging around in his bedroom playing his Xbox. You might want to get them swapped and get him kicked out. It's like there's angles there for us to raise awareness, as you said. We're the ones who can input that to everyday homeowners. Maybe just not aware of these things need changing. I just think it's up there forever and it just works, like the security alarm or whatever else.
Yeah, and the reality is that, some of the older, they're recommended every 10 years, I think it is, or should be replaced every 10 years.
Yeah.
And I've got a little story from a guy that used to work for me who moved down south. So Bill, I think he listens to the podcast. So he had a situation where he'd been called in to, I think he was having a look at some sockets or some electrical work within the property, and luckily he hadn't done any work, so it didn't scare him. But he basically got a call the next day after he'd been round from this customer to say that they'd had a fire in the kitchen, and it had come from, because they could tell because of where the burning was, it had come from a plug-in Amazon light that was on charge overnight. It wasn't because they were on a cheap tariff, it was just plugged in, and it was plugged in overnight. And that had basically, that whilst it was charging, that had basically just caught fire, overheated, caught fire. And it was directly underneath the kitchen units. So the fire had gone up and basically set fire to the kitchen units. And he had I think it was like a 15-year-old AICO smoke alarm in the kitchen, or heat alarm, I can't remember, but basically an alarm in the kitchen. And that had woke him up at 2 o'clock in the morning to basically tell him there was a fire. So it was 5 years out of date. So it's kind of, it's sketchy as to whether or not it would work or not, and what have you. But it just shows you that even when they're out of date, they can work. And the fact that if he didn't have that alarm in place, then that could have easily taken the full house up easily, because the amount of damage it had done to this kitchen in however long it took the smoke alarm or heat alarm to go off, the amount of damage it had done was incredible. Basically a brand new kitchen, and that was only in maybe 10, 15 minutes as it was smouldering away before the heat alarm kicked in. Imagine if they hadn't have had anything, they're sleeping upstairs and that house just goes up. And so after that, I was just like, all these things are just stacking up as to why would you not try and push a fire safety within a property where, at the end of the day, selfishly for an electrician, it's more revenue for you, it's more work for you to do, but you're actually also increasing the safety of that property for that family. And so I often tell that story to customers, because I kind of say, look, I want to leave after we've done your job. I want to leave it safer than when we came. And I think us putting you this smoke alarm system, which is going to cost you £500 for like a full, from scratch system or whatever it is, depending on the scale of the job. It's quite a small amount to pay on top of the 15, 16 grand that you're going to pay for this brand new solar battery EV charger job. But it can have the most impact because it's protecting your investment and your family. So
Yeah, I mean, when you need it and those things are going off, you're glad you've spent the money, aren't you? That's for sure, because you might be evacuating in very quick time out of the building with your kids at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
it's
that
serious,
smoke
isn't
alarm
it?
saved that house and that family and it was 5 years out of date, but it was still there and it still did it.
Yeah, I think that the challenge for us as electricians, I suppose, is understanding the kind of systems we do need to specify. And I'll hold my hand up to this of getting it wrong before thinking that a battery smoke alarm that's maybe interlinked would satisfy the building regs of the time in the past. I won't name the product, but there was a particularly large American company that brought some smoke detection devices out in the UK that were linked wirelessly, and some of them could be battery powered. And we went through that learning journey of understanding that didn't actually tick all the boxes that it needed to. And we can still make those mistakes now, especially with batteries that might be in a detached garage. We was talking before coming on to chat about this, Sam, that we've still put battery-powered radio-linked AICO alarms in detached garages to tie in with a household system. Maybe that doesn't satisfy the intent of all the regulations, but it's better than having nothing in there, and getting a cable to interlink between those two places is a cost the consumer won't carry. So it's kind of trying to sit in a place where, like you just said, you're making it safer. It's maybe not going as far as the regs would like us to in full intent, but we're a lot better than not having it.
Yeah, well, I think what we'll do a little bit later in this episode, we'll go through some of the products, because I've done that where I'm like, I know this alarm needs to be hardwired, but there is nothing here. There is nothing. I'm going to rip this house apart trying to find a permanent supply. So we've had to do it as like a method of last resort of putting a 10-year lithium in a certain room or somewhere where we just can't find a permanent supply, and interlinking that. But we'll probably touch on what those little workarounds are, because there's some really cool smart link modules and loads of different things like that that we should look at. But in terms of like what we need to do for the PAS, I think if we touch on that first, and then what the type of alarms are that could help us comply with that. So in the PAS, it recommends an LD2 grade 2 system. So what do those letters and numbers actually mean in terms of what's going on a ceiling in a property, potentially?
So your D2 is referring essentially to the type of alarm. So a D2 alarm essentially would be mains powered with a battery backup. Okay, but the battery backup on a D2 alarm is user replaceable. So they're the ones that go flat at 2 o'clock in the morning and will start beeping randomly. Good alarm, nothing wrong. Obviously it's a good standard of system, but they're not a rechargeable kind of cell like you can get in a D1 alarm. But the D2 alarm, that'd be essentially the type of alarm. So like I say, battery with mains power. When you're looking at LD2, that's when you're looking at essentially the density or the amount of alarms you're fitting within the property. So an LD2 system, typically in a typical building or typical home, you're probably going to be looking top and bottom of the stairs and your kitchen and your living room. So essentially your circulation spaces that form part of an escape route and high risk areas. So in a normal-ish property, you're going to get 4 alarms. But like I said earlier on, every property is different. So if you have, bulkheads that are quite large and things like that, you might need an extra alarm in the hallway. If you've got somebody, for argument's sake, when we say high-risk area, somebody may well have a home office. That becomes a high-risk area because you've got people working, long periods of time with office equipment and stuff like that. So traditionally, like I say, top and bottom stairs, kitchen, living room, but like I say, essentially it's down to kind of like a risk assessment when you're within that property as to how many and where you'd need to fit those alarms, essentially.
And that's such a step from what people have, like we've discussed, going from having a smoke alarm at the bottom of the stairs and one at the top of the stairs that maybe saw a battery pass its way a year ago but never actually got one put in. That's such a step up, and I've noticed that when I'm chatting to customers and they go, well, yeah, just if you need to put a new battery in it, that's fine. I go, no, we need to put a mains powered with battery backup one in. We just tend to use the lithium backup ones because it's just easier, and guarantee that I'm going to get a call back to Derby or down south somewhere because the smoke alarm system isn't working, and actually it just needs the battery replacing. Whereas the lithium is kind of done and dusted for the 10 years, but it's quite a step to go from that very basic low level protection to going, right, we need one in your kitchen, one in your living room, one at the bottom of the stairs, which will replace one of these battery ones, one at the top of the stairs, which will replace this battery one, and one in the garage where we're going to put your solar and battery system. And so when you start to propose that to customers and they go, oh, well, none of the other companies have recommended that, and you're kind of like, oh, yeah, but I can't tell you how important I think this is. But when you're not the one as a contractor paying for that, it's can be quite a hard sell. But it's kind of one of our red lines now where we go, look, we want to bring this up to standard. If you want to use us as a contractor to do your job, then we'll make sure that it's as close as we can get to the PAS rules and regs that they state. And I just I try and really drum home this. And the guys aren't thrilled when it's a full smoke alarm system that they've got to put in, because it's getting very involved with the home's electrical system. But once it's done, it is nice to know that home is now fully protected. Because a lot of these customers that we deal with, Mark, and you might be the same, have young families. Because usually we're fitting a system at a property, a solar and battery system at a property, because they've got high energy demand, and that's usually because there's a family there. And so you're thinking, well, the risk of this is quite high, because they've got young kids there that will be messing about with stuff all the time and bumping things into fridges and freezers and all this sort of stuff. And you kind of think, well, if there's a time to really bolster your fire protection, it's probably now when you've got young kids, because that £500,000, whatever it is, to do a full system, you'll be so glad of it if there is ever a problem, and you would happily go back and pay that £1,000 and more if something happened. But yeah, it's quite a step, but it's one, like I say, we've rarely put in less than 4 alarms now when it's been like a full rework of a property. But something that I think is really, really important.
I think it's a valid point, and I mean, especially when you're saying that you're going into properties and the one downstairs is connected and it's got a battery in it, but then you went upstairs and that cage is hanging down and the battery's missing. Heaven forbid if there was a fire there. Probably most people, when they do their insurance quotes, yep, I've got smoke alarms top and bottom of the stairs. What is the insurance company going to say when that battery was not in the alarm and there was a fire? It's kind of I think by recommending the upgrade, exactly as you say, you're covering yourself, you're giving the homeowner the option, and I'd say anybody who's had a fire in their home, the one thing they want to make sure afterwards is that they've got a smoke alarm system.
Yeah, I think I think we're going to come to this later when we go through the product range, but is there a way of evidencing your smoke detection system was working after the fact? Are these things smart? Can they keep a log of when they're actually connected and working? I'm thinking again for tenanted properties where the landlord can't be sure they're not been tampered with, for example.
Yeah. I mean, we've got something called the EI1000G, so that's a gateway system. So essentially what you can do is you can link all your smoke alarms via RF to the gateway, and then essentially you can see what's going on with that property. So for argument's sake, if it was a rental property, if the resident took the alarm down, you could set it up so that it sent you a notification on a text message or an email to essentially, to ring the resident and to question that, what's the issue. Or the flip side of it is, if there was an activation, it could again send a text message, is everything okay? So I did speak with a customer the other day who was doing Airbnb properties, and exactly the same. He was like, well, I never knew that system existed. He said, I want it because, I've got lots of people who I don't know about, who I don't know from Adam, who are going to come and stay in my properties, and I want to make sure that system's going to be, if I'm installing it, I want to make sure it's going to be there and working. So
yeah, even more so if you've got battery storage in a property that you're renting, and we're starting to see that. We've got a couple of landlords who've been doing that. I don't know if it's for EPCs or just for added value to the tenants, but same thing, you'll want verification that that alarm system's not tampered with and is working. I suppose my other question is that the mains powered aspect, I understand it's the interlink bit that sometimes confuses me. Does that have to be hardwired, or is RF okay for the requirements?
Yeah, no, RF or hardwired is absolutely fine.
Okay.
If you were doing a connected system, it would have to be RF, but a hardwired system is absolutely fine, or a mixture of the two. So it may well be that you've already got an alarm top and bottom of the stairs, which are hardwired. You could then just put an RF module in one of the existing ones and link it to two new ones that you're installing. And again, you're not having to run cables, lift people's floors up and move beds, wardrobes, everything to try and get in.
That's the learning exercise for me then. So I've maybe not non-complied when I thought I have before, because we've used main-powered ones in a detached garage, but with the RF link, and I just assumed that wasn't acceptable, but it sounds like it is.
No, RF's fine, yeah. No, it's...
Yeah, no, that's got me out of jail so many times. One that we've just done where the property had a fully mains connected system, and it was a fairly new property, or it had been done to quite a high standard. So they had a smoke alarm, top of the stairs, bottom of the stairs, kitchen and living room. So I was like, when I did the survey, I was just praying. I was like, oh, thank you for sending this job my way. But we wanted to, he had a big server rack up in the loft. So we were like, right, probably could do with one up in the loft with all that buzzing away 24 hours. And then our system was going in the garage next door. So we had a look, but this property was decorated to a high level. And I'm looking at thinking, I don't want to rip all this house apart.
Bit of trunking.
Yeah, so a bit of trunking over the freshly painted. Yeah, you'll be all right with that, will you? But yeah, so the one in the loft, we could quite easily take a supply out of the alarm that's on the upstairs landing. So that was quite easy. We could clip that up, and that could be mains interlinked. But the one in the garage was quite tricky. It was an attached garage, so that was fine. But I couldn't, and I didn't want to face taking the whole house apart to get a cable to the nearest alarm, which would be like the downstairs entrance. And so all we did was, unfortunately, the alarms weren't AICO. So first thing we had to do was say, right, we're going to change these alarms to AICO, which they were about 2 years away from expiring anyway. So we changed the alarms to AICO, and then we put a RF module within the alarm in the downstairs entrance, and then we put an RF module in the one in the garage. And again, like, this was a job sent from the gods. The pendant in the garage had a permanent supply in it, so it meant we could just take a supply out of that pendant and into the AICO alarm, and then link that our new AICO alarm in the garage, to the rest of the system by that little RF module. And it was just one of them situations where you're like, if we hadn't have had that ability to RF the interlink, we would have had to have taken this house apart to get that cable in for one alarm into the garage. And so that was really, really handy. And I just want to make it clear on the gateway side of things, because we've installed quite a lot of the gateways as well, is that with the gateways, we need to fit an RF module in every single alarm, so that it can independently talk to the gateway. Is that
That's right, yeah. So essentially, basically, then each alarm will talk to the gateway, so that you can get a notification if anything changes. So essentially, obviously, once you've got that system, installed, you can run reports on alarms that are going out of date. So for argument's sake, if you fitted those systems 8 years ago, you could run a report for next year to say, right, which alarms are coming up to their kind of, going out of date period. So you could run a report for that. But then likewise, you can also set it up for your notifications, like say for fire, for tamper, anything like that. You can set them up 1,001 ways, basically, essentially. And it works on a 2G, 4G SIM card basis, so it doesn't need any kind of residence Wi-Fi or anything like that. Basically, you essentially connected up to an unswitched fuse spare, and that's it, broadcasting.
Yeah, that's some really added value for your customers. I'm going to be honest, we've not fitted any of them, Sam. We're just keeping it at an alarm level for now, but it's certainly something, a USP for you to say that these things are going to check themselves. So a lot of these customers who are buying this high-end stuff maybe don't have the time or want to keep on top of their smoke alarm maintenance. So you've got products in the background looking after all that. It's a no-brainer.
Well, I mean, again, looking at this from an electrician's point of view or a renewables installer's point of view, it's kind of one of the things that we suffer from as an industry is repeat business, because you fit a 15, 20, 30, 50 grand system into someone's house and that's it. They might want another battery in a few years' time, but so we've been looking at, we don't just want to charge people for stuff that they don't need in terms of like repeat business. We're not just going to try and get them to get another battery module if they don't need it, because that affects our kind of brand and reputation. But one things that we can get potential repeat business for is checking their smoke alarm system. Obviously, you might have to wait 10 years to replace the heads on it, but it's then if you do enough of those and you're in business for long enough, you start getting kind of steady business in actually going around changing the heads of these smoke alarms. It's not going to make you a millionaire, but it keeps you in touch with that customer. And if a lot of that can be monitored remotely from someone in the office to go, oh, we've actually got 5 sites where the smoke alarms are going out of date in the next year or two or within the next 6 months. So let's drop them a message and see if that customer wants us to change the heads on the smoke alarms and do a system check on their battery. So then it's repeat business. And day one that you start doing that, it's going to take a while to get all that repeat business. But the sooner you start, the sooner you're ticking that clock down as to when that repeat business is going to come in. So it's trying to think of ways to add value that doesn't really add an awful lot of cost, because it doesn't add a lot of cost, like we've said, to a 15 grand job to add an extra 500 quid, £1,000 to that to protect the home. For me, it seems like a bit of a no-brainer, but I am very biased because I do that.